What happens when police officers put handcuffs on a woman in a plain jacket, not knowing they are facing a legend of special operations? What happened after her single phrase in court made the entire room fall silent? Before continuing the story, write in the comments your city or country where you're watching from. Your opinion inspires us to get better. That day at the Vermont shooting range, there was a museum-like stillness before opening. A low fog still clung to the tips of the wooden targets. Only the click of a bolt or the knock of a thermos against the edge of a metal bench broke the morning calm. When Allison Drake entered the range, nobody even turned their head, and it was no surprise. A plain gray jacket, a baseball cap, worn jeans. Nothing remarkable. No bracelets with slogans, nothing that said, "Girls can shoot too." Just the long case over her shoulder and the walk of someone who knew exactly how many steps it was to the nearest cover. Frank Linder, the range manager, a former detective and hardened cynic, was sitting behind the glass of his booth, sipping watered-down coffee from a thermos with a sticker. Retirement meant finally being able to ignore idiots without consequences. He looked at the woman as though observing a new dog breed, with slight distrust and professional suspicion. "Well, that's interesting," he muttered to himself. No sports gear, no hunting gestures, no curiosity. She just came, stood, and hit dead center. The first shot cracked like spit on glass. Then came the second and third. Allison didn't adjust her sight for wind, didn't line up the post, didn't purse her lips like beginners usually do. Her breathing was rhythmic, like a metronome. Inhale for 4 counts, shot on the exhale. Calm, methodical, unnervingly precise. 20 minutes later, one of the visitors, a burly man in a tactical vest, ran up to Frank, noticeably tense. "Hey, did you see her? She's not just shooting, she's doing the impossible." "Really? Who is she? What's your diagnosis, Joe? Jealousy or suspicion?" But he was already dialing a number. Half an hour later, 2 local police officers arrived at the range. One young and nervous, the other older, with the face of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Good morning, ma'am. We need to see your papers and your firearm license," said the older one with a slight southern accent. Allison didn't flinch, didn't dig into her pockets. She simply turned to them and said firmly, "I don't have them with me." The younger cop's hand was already hovering near her holster. The senior officer sighed and nodded. "Then you'll have to come with us." She didn't resist. No gesture, no protest. Just a slight shrug, as if politely inviting them to escort her. Strangely, it seemed as though she was leading them, not the other way around. On the way to the car, Frank noticed that her gaze never lingered on the officers. She scanned the horizon, the tree line, the buildings, like she was looking for vantage points or escape routes. When they brought her to the station, the old building on the edge of Gray Hill was quiet, without drama. She sat in the cell without moving, without speaking. To every question, no sound, no name, no address, no explanation. Just silence, which in a police station sounded louder than a siren. "Maybe she's a spy or some kind of cult nut," one officer joked, sipping rubber-flavored coffee. "God forbid she's a former Marine," muttered another. When Detective Noah Hudson, the only man in the station who willingly wore a suit, entered for questioning, he used the classic formula: a touch of kindness, a bit of threat, a nudge to help yourself. "Word is Washington's already whispering. Coordinates came in. Either you cooperate or you stay in this cell till doomsday." She looked at him with the eyes of someone used to the distance of a sniper scope. No fear, no emotion, no need to explain anything. When they handed her a glass of water and her sleeve rode up slightly, the young officer, curious, noticed. "That's from rope work, right? A climbing mark." For the first time that day, she answered, almost. They soon took her to court. The old building creaked with wooden benches and squeaky floors. Everything dragged on as a boring procedure. The prosecutor muttered about an unconfirmed identity. The defense attorney complained his client wasn't cooperating. The judge looked irritated. And then the heavy oak doors swung wide open. An admiral in full dress uniform entered. His medals gleamed under the neon lights. His footsteps sounded like a solo march of salvation. Officers scattered through the hall instinctively snapped to attention. Even the judge straightened as if at an exam. "I declare this hearing closed," she said after examining the sealed envelope the Admiral handed over via the court officer. "All charges are dismissed immediately." When the guard removed Allison's handcuffs, she spoke the first time in front of everyone. Her voice was soft, but without a shadow of doubt. "Apologies for the inconvenience, sir." The Admiral nodded. "Commander Hayes, the Navy should be apologizing to you." And then the courtroom froze, because no one had known they had just arrested a legend. The silence that followed seemed unreal. Even breathing stopped being audible. The word commander echoed against the paneled walls, settling deep in the chest of everyone present. Judge Ellen Rose, a 40-year veteran of military law and known as an ice block among federal colleagues, made no unnecessary motion. She only straightened further, standing not as a judge, but as someone who just realized whom she had tried to judge. "Commander Hayes," she said, not as a representative of justice, but as a woman suddenly finding herself on history's defendant's bench. "If I had known, but I could not have known, Your Honor," Allison replied calmly, rising slowly to her full height, as if shedding a weight of several tons. And that was exactly what she had intended. The solemn silence was broken by the clumsy gesture of the court-appointed lawyer. He stood, wearing the look of a man who just realized he'd been defending a nuclear warhead, mistaking it for a toaster. "Your Honor, sir, excuse me, Admiral," he stammered. "I wasn't informed." "And you shouldn't have been, Mr. Hardy," the Admiral cut in, not raising his voice, but with such weight that the air grew heavy. "Thank you for trying." The lawyer sat back down with the face of someone who just swallowed a ladle of hot cement. Judge Rose nodded once more. "Case closed. All records destroyed. Everyone present will sign a confidentiality agreement." She didn't use her gavel. She just walked out. And that said more than any strike on the desk. Allison slowly turned to the detective in the first row. His face showed confusion, not from fear, but from understanding. His name was Garrett Wells, the same cop who had first ordered her to show her papers. He rose, hesitated, then approached her. "Commander Hayes," he said, savoring the name. "I owe you an apology." Allison looked him in the eye, no longer hiding behind an ordinary face, not playing invisible. Now her gaze was sharp, like a sniper's. "No need," she said. "You did your job, detective, and you did it well. Too well." He blinked, unsure whether to take it as a compliment. "I really couldn't have known," he muttered. "That's why now you do know. And that's enough," she answered softly. The Admiral, who had been silently watching, nodded. "Time to go, Commander. We have a report waiting in Washington." As Allison turned, an older man in a cap with Medical Corps Desert Storm stitched on it stood by the door. He looked at her with a mix of respect, wonder, and something else, maybe hope. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, stepping closer. "I was there in '91 as a medic with the Marines. Spent all morning here not knowing what was unusual about you. Now I see. Everything about you is exactly as it should be. Thank you for your service, whatever form it took." She didn't hesitate. She extended her hand. He gripped it firmly, and a spark of warmth lit her eyes. "Thank you for being there too. We carry each other, even when we don't realize it." As she left, the hall silently parted for her. The road ahead was free, without fear, without submission. Only genuine, deserved respect. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows and untraceable plates was waiting. The Admiral opened the door for her, and without a word, Allison stepped inside. "All equipment has been returned to base," reported the driver, a young officer with a forgettable face. "Your team is already in Mansur." "Good," she answered briefly. On the way, the Admiral asked, "Was it hard to keep silent?" "Hardest part was not reacting when they put the cuffs on," she admitted. "But that was the mission, total immersion, even if it meant immersion in humiliation." He nodded, honoring her with silence. True silence, not a pause, but recognition. An hour later, she stood on the shore, looking out. Beyond the waves loomed a submarine. The next stage of her mission waited aboard. The name of her operation was engraved on a plaque in the briefing hall: Safe Haven. And all that remained was to disappear again. No medals, no interviews, no books. She took off her cap, faced the wind, and whispered, "Legends don't need orchestral music, just a clean shot and silence." Night suddenly fell on Winslow Port with that northern sharpness when the air feels like a freshly honed blade. In the window of the old shooting club, blackened with age and tobacco smoke, dim light fell across floors marked with the prints of military boots. Frank Mason, the club's owner and a man who could spot a special ops agent among a crowd of farmers, was finishing his tools when the door opened. "We're closed," he grumbled, without looking up. "And what if I came for what I left?" answered a familiar voice. Frank looked up. Allison stood in the doorway. She wasn't in civilian clothes, nor in uniform, something in between. A jacket with a worn collar, pants you couldn't buy in a store, and that gaze, the kind you could measure in kilometers, like the reach of a sniper's bullet. "You came for the rifle," he said, not asked, but confirmed. She nodded. He disappeared behind a screen and returned a minute later with a case. She knew what was inside. "We got a package from the sheriff with a note. Return immediately to owner. Didn't even open it. I figured whose it was." Allison placed the case on the table, opened it, and began assembling the rifle. Her movements were precise, almost musical. "You could have left and forgotten this place. Why come back?" "Because this is where they arrested me. And now I'm here by choice. That's balance." He nodded without asking further, because he knew. When someone like her spoke of balance, it wasn't philosophy, it was survival physics. "I didn't stop you that day, though I could have. I knew if I interfered, I'd only complicate things. But I called an old friend at the Pentagon. He didn't say a word on the line, but I know he heard me." Allison looked at him, not as at a range owner, but as a comrade. "Thank you, Frank. Sometimes one right action weighs more than 100 orders." She walked to the far line. The sun had already set, leaving the sky the color of scorched metal. She aimed at a barely visible target in the dusk. Shot. The rifle's sound was like a sigh. The answer was silence. Frank, peering through binoculars, smiled. Dead center, without a scope, in twilight. My God, how much do you keep hidden? Enough. Enough that no one dares ask that question aloud. They returned inside. Allison removed her gloves, laid the rifle in its case, then suddenly asked, "You still have that old army radio?" He froze. "Haven't touched it in 10 years, but didn't throw it out." "They're planning something at HQ," she said simply. He opened a drawer, pulled out a plain envelope, and handed it to her. Inside was a new number. No name, no code, just digits and a handwritten phrase. "If someone shoots like me, let me know." He slipped the card into his shirt pocket. "Observation," he murmured. "It all starts with observation." They parted without extra words. Allison vanished into the night like a shadow, leaving no trace, no reason to stay. As he closed the door, he muttered quietly, "Some come back not for their things, but for the silence." And he was right, because the one they called Commander Hayes wasn't seeking fame. She was seeking silence, silence in which to disappear again until the next moment when silence became too loud.